because man's task is to make the earth after the model of heaven. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Man's project is to heavenize the earth. Man is made to transform the world from glory to glory, to take hold of it and break it down and remake it after the image of heaven.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Reformed Reset. My name is Grant. As you can see, not joined with me is the weaker vessel, but joined with me this time is Dr. Uri Brito. Welcome to the show, Dr. Brito.
Thanks, Grant. Good to see you again, my brother.
Yes, thanks for coming on again. If you guys don't know, I was able to have a conversation with, am I allowed still to call you Uri? Is that all right?
Anytime you want.
Okay. With Uri some months ago, I think back in May. That was before the rebranding, so we might have called our podcast a different name back then. We're the Reformed Reset now. But anyway, that conversation was awesome, talking about Kuyperian commentary, Kuyper, and then James Jordan and his work. It's fantastic. So I think we put it out back in about April, May timeframe of 2021. So go back in the YouTube channel and check that out. Again, go to takeholdstudios.com, subscribe to the YouTube channel, like it, share it, do all that kind of stuff. Stay listening till the end, because I want to announce a giveaway associated with our distinguished guest on this episode. So you have to watch till the end, and then you'll see what you need to do and what you'll possibly win with the giveaway on this with this episode. So I want to read a quick bio, Uri, and then you can add to it whatever you like, because I see at the end it just says you're still a doctoral student, and so I know that you've already successfully earned your doctorate, and so you can talk about what that was on, and I think that will actually kind of segue us into our topic that we want to discuss. So Uri Brito is the senior pastor of Providence Church in Pensecola, Florida, CREC denomination. He is married to Melinda and is the father of 4 children. Is that accurate? 5 now. All right. He is the editor of the Church Friendly Family, author of The Trinitarian Father, and co-author of the ebook Christian Pipe Smoking. He's also authored 2 commentaries now, right? One and both with Rich Lusk. Is that correct?
Yes, I co-authored the commentary on Ruth and a commentary on Jonah that just came out with the very brilliant Rich Lusk.
Awesome. Yeah, Rich, anything you get your hands on that Rich has written is gold too.
I second it.
He's the founder of, we're talking about Uri again. He's the founder and contributor to Kuyperian Commentary, Kuyperian.com, and guest contributor at the Christian Post. He is a board member of the Theopolis Institute. He received his MDiv from Reformed Theological Seminary and has earned a DMin from RTS Orlando. Anything you like to add to the bio?
No, that about covers. I'm not worthy of half of that biography, but I also do some work, by the way, with Andrew Sandlin there in California. I'm the senior fellow of pastoral theology with the Center of Cultural Leadership. They're doing great work, and I'm really honored to be affiliated with those guys there in California.
Awesome. I would also encourage you all to go look up Uri Brito YouTube channel. He puts out some of the Kuyperian commentary podcasts on there, and also the Perspectivalist podcast. You can find that on Spotify and other podcast catchers, and so go listen to those short little gems that he puts out on there. So there we go. There's our setup. But your topic for your doctorate, could you share with us a little bit about what you studied, researched, and did for that?
My doctoral dissertation had a couple of different emphases, but the primary question that I raised in the research process was, what are the principles, or the rituals rather, for pastoral ministry that may aid a pastor's longevity and fruitfulness in the ministry? So these are not the kinds of rituals that you embody and therefore X, Y, or Z happens, but it may add, and there is historical, biblical, and sociological evidence to suggest that the application of these rituals have historically extended the stay of a pastor in the ministry longer than the American average, which I think at this point is around 3.6 years per pastoral minister. And that is a sad statistic. And so I attempted to sort of delve into as to why that was taking place so rapidly across American denominations, primarily in the SBC. They also provide the best statistics, so they're a help in that regard. But that happens all over denominational groups, and it was a concerning trend. It is a concerning trend for many, but for me, certainly in the early stages of my pastoral ministry, you might say, it took on a heightened call. And so I decided to delve into that process for about 5 years, researching and writing, and eventually defended my thesis about 6 months ago.
Awesome. And you know, I think part of the reason why this intrigued me, and I didn't forget, you know, what your dissertation was on, is knowing this is what God's called me to recently, and I'm fresh into this thing, and there are so many questions and concerns, and you do hear about you know, burnout and other things, and or, you know, kind of choosing one or the other. You hear of, you know, pastors neglecting family for the church, or neglecting church for whatever else. I mean, you just hear story after story. And so I was very intrigued and excited to have you back on to talk about that. What did you find? What were some of those things that during the, you know, in the life of a pastor that seemed to increase his longevity?
Well, there were a host of things you could choose from in terms of rituals and principles. And I focused on these three major rituals because I think they hit closest to the intimacy of pastoral life. You know, I've said before, Grant, that when you are thinking about pastoral ministry, the pastor lives one of the most ubiquitous existences among human professions. In other words, we're at the baseball game, we're at the hospital, we're at the wedding, we're at the funeral, we're in graduations, we're in front of people Sunday after Sunday. But we're also simultaneously, I mean, it's hard to figure out sort of this complex definition, but simultaneously, we're also the loneliest of all professions. We are generally statistically friendless. We are tired. We are leisureless, and we hide in many ways. And we keep so much within us because we are in some ways, the priest of confidentiality. We keep so much data within one human being, whereas the parish life sort of continues. And from what they see in the pulpit on Sunday morning, it's as if everything goes on as usual, but there's a forgetfulness in that we're mere mortals, we're humans, and that there are breaking points in our handling of all these things that at some time we need people to be around. And so as I sort of dissected these trends in American evangelicalism, I didn't delve deeply into what happens in the UK or even my own home country, Brazil, but the United States was sort of the center of my focus. I realized that there were a few things that played a gigantic role in determining why certain pastors don't endure long-term, and why men who have been in the ministry for 20 plus years should be in some ways heroic figures in our society, and why they very quickly in the early days of their pastoral ministry decide to, even though they have gone through, you know, in the classical sense, 4 years of seminary education, they have been trained theologically, why within 3 or 4 years after they're graduated, why they're suddenly looking to sell cars, go into telemarketing, go into some kind of insurance, which are, by the way, some of the major professions that pastors leave to after they leave the pastoral ministry. And the three principles or rituals that I, you know, concluded were the rituals of friendship, the ritual of leisure, and the ritual of learning. So friendship, leisure, and learning. And that opened up doors of exploration that I had not considered. You can imagine these are three big fields. And I suspect that if you threw a category there, I could probably put them under one of these three major ones. But they're so substantive in terms of the experience of a pastor on a day-to-day basis that I just mentally and academically, I couldn't escape these three categories. And so we can talk about a little more about them shortly if you'd like. But I parked there and I spent a substantive amount of my research on these three main rituals.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, we should definitely look into each one a little bit, because I could see, I imagine, and part of your research and thinking through this, there's probably a God glorifying way to do all three, and the way that all three can be a pitfall still, possibly.
Yeah, that's exactly right. These three, they are gigantic benedictions in the life of a minister, if embraced wholeheartedly, and it will certainly be done poorly by ministers. But if the minister keeps them in the forefront of their mind as priorities, even their failures will be beneficial in the long term.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe we'll come back. I do have some prepared, questions that I did as far as life of the pastor goes. I wanted to make sure to ask, and maybe we can swing back around to those three rituals, because that is good. I wrote it down just because I want to keep that in the forefront, just like you said. But one of the things that I wanted to ask is, we're both post-millennial. We're both post-millennial in our eschatological outlook. We love Kuiper, and we love this kind of, productive, every day, everything we do matters. Even the little tedious tasks matter. God is sovereign over all of it. And so we have this impetus for productivity. We want to work, write, talk, teach. We just want to keep going and going and going. And I love that. It brings life to the church, and it's certainly commanded in the Bible to not be a sluggard and to be productive. Right. How do we find balance while staying productive, as far as not overdoing it or not neglecting certain areas of your life? And I guess, how do you guard yourself from not going too far in one area and justifying it as, well, I'm being productive?
I think even if you have, let's just assume for the sake of conversation that I am an extroverted Latin man. Okay. And that usually means that we pour ourselves wholeheartedly into lots of things, and there's usually little stamina left at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. Even someone as extroverted as I am needs to sit back and contemplate basic Puritan principles of self-examination. Puritan pastors can be critiqued for lots of things, and I share in my criticism lots of things among Puritan pastors. I have some criticisms of Richard Baxter, but we can talk about that later as well. But the one thing they did well is they had this very intentional re-examination of their own pastoral ministries. And that happened often. It was at times a painful thing. Sometimes it happened for Calvin in Geneva. It happened in the company of pastors, where he sought wisdom from other pastors around the Geneva area to offer insight into his own life. Of course, it's very hard to critique Calvin. So what ended up happening eventually was Calvin ended up becoming the major critic of everyone else in the company of pastors. But still, we need that kind of mentality that we're always going back and saying, okay, and our wives can play a massive role in that as well. They need to be trained. Our wives need to be trained. Pastors' wives need to be trained to be truth tellers to their husbands. That's good. Because for our wives, we are their husbands first and their pastors second. And so they need to be truth tellers in that regard. And if they don't, very easily, the pastor will live a life of constant, especially if he's very gifted at what he does, the pastor will be living a life of sort of constant praise and adoration from his peers and parishioners. And he will not have the opportunity to sort of sit back and say, am I exaggerating how much time I'm out with the men for book studies or whatever noble reasons you want to use? Have I pushed the academic part too much. And the general trend in pastoral ministry, almost always you'll see this, is that if you meet pastors, and I had a chance to interview older pastors, one of their major regrets, the common thread out of all their regrets when I asked them, and I interviewed them for hours and hours, was that they neglected their children. And so that was good for me to hear as a father of five, because I want to make sure that's not a part of my I don't want, I may have other regrets, at the end of my time, but the one regret I don't want to have is that I fell in the same measure as the expectation of pastors throughout history, at least certainly the last 50 years. Whereas you look at a pastor as a father, and almost always it is, he neglected his family. Right. I did not want to be part of that statistic. And so these kinds of back and forth, these sort of conversations with spouse and reliable men in your community, which, by the way, Grant, the kinds of friends that pastors ought to have almost always should not be men in your own congregation. Because, and this is where there's some, definitional confusion here. The pastor is a shepherd, and the people are sheep. That's the biblical language here. We all share in one common priesthood, even though we have a different kind of priesthood that the regular layman and the parishioner does. The kinds of things we carry are the kinds of things that would be unfair to bring to the attention of parishioners, and sometimes even the fellow session members. We carry lots of things, and my recommendation was that in a dissertation that we need allies and confidants. And whereas we may have lots of allies in our local body, session members, diaconate, men in the church that we love to be around, we can drink beer with, smoke cigars, watch games with. Confidants are a whole different level of species. These are men perhaps that are most certainly aware of the pastorate or have a tender heart for pastoral ministry, with whom we spend time with. At times, it might even be worth driving 3 to 4 hours to meet them somewhere. And they are in some ways divorced from your immediate community. Therefore, the burdens you share with them don't mean the same as if you're sharing with someone down the road. And so these are some of the kinds of things that I think need to be a part of the grammar of pastoral daily ministry that pastors often don't think about, but that will help, to use your language, moderate our excesses and our abuses in pastoral ministry. That's
great. Yeah, that's really good. Really good advice. I could definitely probably rabbit trail and just keep talking on that one thing. Because that definitely several other questions pop up in my head with that. Along the same lines though, personal spiritual vitality. I know we can, a lot of people have conversations about reading habits, prayer habits, and quiet times, journaling, how much, how long, and all that kind of thing. But do you have any practical tips as a pastor of over a decade, over 15 years, close to 15?
I just began my 14th year.
Okay, yeah,
in full time. Yeah,
awesome. And so, what are some great ways to maintain personal spiritual vitality while at the same time being responsible for your spouse's spiritual vitality, your children's, and that of your congregants? It's a heavy burden, a heavy load to carry. What are some practical tips for maintaining?
Well, that may fall under the category of learning, and I think that's a really significant aspect of pastoral. You're asking specifically about sort of reading habits, is that correct?
Yeah, and like the personal spiritual vitality of the pastor, like for yourself as the pastor, while you're trying to meet the needs of everyone else as well. Don't neglect yourself. How do you keep growing?
Yeah, that's a tremendously important question. And if a minister fails in his piety, he may not immediately fail in his shepherding, but the accumulation of failed piety will catch up with his shepherding. And so that is a very crucial dimension, I think, of pastoral life. You mentioned the stamina, the energy, the pastoral energy stems not from personal charisma, and it certainly doesn't stem from personal giftedness. Personal giftedness will only get you so far. Mark Driscoll's personality and giftedness can only get him so far. Right. The pastor's piety, accountability will take him very far. And that will often mean that it'll be at times a very different kind of ministry. It'll often mean that at times, whatever ideals you had from seminary training or from any kind of theological institute training, that the ideal that a lot of bloggers have. And I'll pause this just to add this footnote that one of my gifts in life has been discouraging men to go into ministry. I view that as a tremendous gift, because when I hear the expectations of a lot of folks as if they're going to spend most of their time sort of locked in an office reading commentaries, translating their text, all good and noble things, but that can be so easily interrupted by a child's concussion, by grandma dying, by an important phone call, by a broken marriage, by one of your kids hurting themselves. It's something you have to say, oops, I got to end this meeting right now. I got to go back home to help my wife. These things can be easily interrupted, and pastors should be very comfortable with interruptions. In fact, I think part of the definition of a pastor ought to be someone who is comfortable with interruptions, because a pastor has this very neat little Google Calendar agenda for the week, which I do every week. I have a very nice little neat calendar of how my agenda is going to unfold. Now, 80% of the time it unfolds the way I expected, but the 20%, they come in very rapidly. And I think as we sort of work our way into the pastoral ministry, we should be prepared for these interruptions. But the one thing we ought to keep in mind is, let's say you have 8 hours in a typical day, and let's say you're, just to give an example. So I got here around 8:30 this morning. It's 3 o'clock Central Time. I have another hour and a half before I head home. So 8-9 hours, so to speak. The 8-9 hours, I believe, ought to include everything that has to do with the pastor's outward ministry and his inward ministry. So I don't say to myself, I'm going to do my Bible reading at 6 o'clock in the morning, or I'm going to use my time of prayer before I go to work. I include my time of prayer and my time of, let's say, personal Bible reading, my personal liturgical life, personal piety, within my allotted time for the workday, so that my entire ministry, my 8 hours, so to speak, incorporates the practices of piety that I'm going to immediately apply to my practices of corporate piety as a pastor. And so I include them all into one. And I'll add one more thing here. This is something that I've had a few conversations on I think on our Puritan podcast. I had a conversation with Pastor Bill Smith on the pastor and his the vocation of the physical nature of pastoral ministry. In other words, what does it mean to stay in shape? What does it mean to be healthy? Because that's utterly significant as well. I would also include the workout routines, all of that within the regular schedule of a pastor. And typically we bifurcate all these things. We say, well, pastoral ministry doesn't include healthy practices. Well, here's the difference here. Several years ago, I was going through a very difficult time in my congregation, and I was not severely, but certainly overweight, maybe 20 pounds plus. It was an exceedingly more difficult season for me because I was overweight, because that meant that mentally I wasn't as sharp as I should be. Emotionally, I wasn't prepared as I should be. And at that moment, I sort of came to the realization that if I don't connect my health with my pastoral habits, that when I bifurcate these things, when I dichotomize these things, I'm creating unnecessary tension, because I have bought into the, Gnostic tendency that my physical activity is divorced from my pastoral activity. Right. And that's not the case. So even if I have a long day of 8 or 9 hours, I want to say that within those 8 or 9 hours, I include a workout routine, prayer, Bible reading, sermon preparation. That's all included in this one package deal. And so learning to put all these elements together has allowed me to sort of preserve, especially later on now in my 13th, 14th year, to continue with that kind of vitality and strength and stamina to deal with the good and the bad and the ugly of pastoral ministry day to day.
That's awesome. That's incredibly helpful. And I love that you even point out that, you know, part of this is rejecting that Gnostic tendency that seems, well, it seems to be a temptation in the history of the church from the very beginning. And we just keep, it's like whack-a-mole. Every couple centuries, we're whacking a new version of Gnosticism. But I think there's many that would say, like, you know, like you're saying, the being in shape physically is not as important as the heart, you know, as if the two could be separated like that.
Exactly. And that is one of the research conclusions that was most evident to me is not only are pastors, one of the pastoral ministry, one of the professions with the highest level of depression. That was a study at the Missouri Lutheran Church that was done some years ago. But also pastoral ministry produces some of the most obese professionals among other professions in America. And we, in some ways, have kind of standardized that practice by assuming that if you are from a sort of a more fundamentalistic, a more, the kind of theological background where you sort of spiritualize a lot of things, you will say, listen, I'm overweight because I'm doing God's work.
Right.
And
having meals with people,
having meals with people. And it's the kind of, I fell into that sort of environment. You know, when people ask me, what do I do? In some ways I say, I drink and eat for a living. It's not uncommon for me to be in coffee shops and restaurants. Exactly. Every single day. That's kind of part of my life. Yeah. But you have to learn to sort of moderate these things, and the connections we make with our bodies and our souls and our just general disposition to confront issues day to day need to be brought and harmonized. Otherwise, we're losing much of what we can give as ministers and men to our congregations.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That even that topic with physical health relating, I think we could really delve into that too, and the implications of being out of shape and just what that means, you know. Yeah, anyway, really good. So best advice you received when you were a new pastor? I know throwing this one out at you, but
that's okay. When I was doing an internship, I did a 3-year internship, which is also known as the longest internship in church history. It was a very, very long, for a variety of reasons, ended up well, and it was a wonderful preparation. But one of the things I heard that was simultaneously frightening and challenging in a good way was the statement that every church becomes like their pastor. And when I first heard that, I felt pity for the church that I was going to pastor. And now as I look back at that, I realize that the Apostle Paul had a very well-developed imitative theology.
Yeah.
And to the point where he says in 1 Corinthians that I was a father unto them. And pastoral ministry in some ways is the pastor with all his failures and his humanity attempting to incorporate habits and rituals into a church life that allows the church to be good humans like he is a good human. And in the Reformed world, that sounds a little strange because we sort of accepted this idea that there's none good, none but one. Right. In Romans 3, it's a different context altogether. Right. But I think we are to grow in our I call it our Christo humanity, and the pastor happens to be the called shepherd to instruct, to lead, to guide, to protect. And when you incorporate all these rituals in church life, well, guess what? If you are training your people, if you are teaching and preaching to your people, if you're catechizing your people, if you're administering the Eucharist to your people Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, if you're there when grandma dies, if you're there when little George grows up to get married, if you're there in the central events in the life of a people, for them not to imitate what they're listening and watching and seeing would be an absolute disaster. And so the fact that a pastor is setting the stage for a congregation to look like him is a daunting thing. But the more you embrace your calling, the more committed you are to that prospect. And that means that the congregation will also have flaws that you have. Mm-hmm. And that's perfectly fine as long as you are aware of those flaws and you're constantly seeking to bring them into submission to the Lord Jesus Christ.
So you need to embrace it, but at the same time, ensure you're embracing humility at the same time.
You do. Yeah. And I think part of the problem with all these sort of celebrities that have sort of fallen off the cliff these days is that they have attempted a kind of imitative theology that only went so far. Yeah. And the way you break into that distance that pastors have from their congregations, the more distant a pastor creates from his people, the less you'll be able to produce a kind of imitative population, imitative parish life. You just won't be able to do these kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And so you can attempt to ask your people to sort of emulate your charisma, your stamina, your rhetorical prowess, your gifts of reading a book a day, these kinds of things. But ultimately, that's not what builds imitative habits. What builds imitative habits is when your wife's friend comes into your home and sees half of your home in absolute disarray. And she says, "Oh, I think you're someone worthy of emulate." At that point, when your humanity is at display in the good times and the bad times, imitation becomes desirable rather than something that you're always trying to avoid. So it's inevitable that the congregation becomes like their pastor, but the pastor needs to put his humanity on display as much as it is possible. And that includes all sorts of things. It includes good hospitality, good fellowship, good communion, a good time with your people. So they can relate to you at a very human level as well. And that becomes difficult, by the way, as your church gets bigger. It becomes difficult because necessarily you become just a bit more distant, just the guy who is the guy who's robed up in the pulpit on Sunday morning. And so as the church gets bigger, the pastor has a few other issues to contemplate. Right. How do I get closer to my people at a different level of intimacy than when we only had 50, 80 people? Right. So there are layers of intimacy the pastor has, and the pastor adjusts as the church grows or shrinks. As it shrinks, the pastor becomes more intimate with his congregation. He spends more time with George, more time with John. And as the congregation grows, the pastor becomes more strategic in his intimacy.
Great. Awesome. Very, very helpful. We sort of touched on longevity a little bit earlier, but we're talking about all these different practices and pastoral ministry. There's some differing views, or at least people have different opinions when it comes to burnout, and then even the topic of sabbaticals, right? You hear about some pastors will every year take a month off, or every however many years they take a big long break. What's your opinion? If you don't mind sharing, if that was any part of the dissertation that you did, as far as burnout, is that legitimate? Is sabbatical something everyone should practice or not? What do you think?
Yeah, I have my dissertation right in front of me here, and I'm searching some things to remember what I said on that topic.
Yeah, okay.
But I did have a section called Sabbaticals as Leisure, and I think it fits under. In some ways, it can fit in under the three categories. It could be a category of leisure, it could be a category of learning, or it could be a category of developing friendships. Let's say you want to take a short sabbatical, spend time with a mentor that you've had in a week or two. So these are build friendships and build other things simultaneously. I think sabbaticals are a necessity in the life of a pastor, but he has to, I'll phrase it in a very simple way. He has to earn his sabbaticals. Very good, and the general trend line, I think, in denomination like the PCA, it's not in the CREC, but if I have a word, I'll try to make this I'll try to make it as a standard in the CREC. But after the 7th year of a minister, he should be able to take an extended sabbatical. And by extended sabbatical, and I have some other caveats to that, but extended sabbatical, I'm not saying 6 months, which is common practice in some mainline Presbyterian churches. I'm saying 1 month. I'm saying 1 month and no more for a variety of reasons, but 1 month and no more. In my case, I took sabbaticals as I was writing my dissertation for academic reasons. My goal, since I'm now in my 14th year, is perhaps take a sabbatical for family reasons, just spend a month with my family,
right?
Do some visits, visit other churches, and visit some friends around the country. But I think it's crucial and it's necessary and it's distinct from vacation. Sabbatical has a very specific purpose. Vacations can mean just that I go to Maine to hang out with Grant and spend time with him. That's a different thing altogether. It's an enjoyable, it's a non-structured thing, vacation. Sabbaticals need to be very well prepared. There needs to be specific directions given to sessions and leaders in the church. There's all sorts of things connected to that. In fact, part of my research in sabbaticals was dealing with pastors who took sabbaticals and came back from 3-month sabbaticals, for example, and no longer recognized the church. Or pastors who went out on a 6-month sabbatical, came back, and within a week or so decided that the church, by default, obviously not a structured kind of polity, had essentially voted in his absence that he should no longer be their pastor. So trust me, I've seen a lot of these insane examples. But so what I propose is a structured sabbatical, an intentional sabbatical that allow pastors to refresh themselves. And in the case, if you have academic and writing tendencies, which I have, there's sabbaticals to essentially say, okay, Uri, I'll give you 3 to 4 weeks to finish this book project. Or Uri, I'll give you 3 to 4 weeks to, finish this degree or something of that nature. And I encourage sessions to be behind these efforts, because a pastor who takes a structured sabbatical, for example, is a pastor who will be worth having when he comes back from it. But again, it has to be very well planned and very thought through before it happens.
Okay, awesome.
Which is not what happens, by the way, Grant. What usually happens is guys are just, when they reach their 7th year, like in the PCA, they're like, whoa, a 2-month sabbatical.
Right.
Here we go. And it becomes a vacation. That's exactly right.
I think that distinction between vacation and a structured sabbatical, that's really helpful, because I think all I ever had heard before was, it's essentially just vacation, time off. I know, who there's like John Piper, I think always took is it summer or something, a month, and would write a book. I don't know if it was every year, every other year or something, but there's some that took their sabbatical for productive purposes. But I think predominantly the way I have understood it was more like a vacation. So anyway, that distinction is really helpful.
It should be different, and it also should be the kinds of things that, as a minister ages in the congregation, as the congregation it becomes also a way of the congregation rewarding the pastor for his labors, and saying, you have shown so much love for us, and now we're honoring you by giving you this time aside so you can love us even more. Right. And so congregations and sessions should be behind these efforts as a way of, the typical perspective I hear is, well, wait a minute, nobody else gets a sabbatical. No other profession gets a sabbatical. Why should a pastor get a sabbatical? Well, if you understand the biblical import of the role of the pastor in the biblical narrative, you realize very quickly, this is not a profession like others. To quote Luther, it's not more important than others. It's not more important than the cobblers in the grand scheme of things. But to put the language in sort of Lutheran perspective, the pastor is handling more holy things. And because of that, that means his life is in constant danger. And because of that, if we do not treat his profession and his life, body and soul well, we are endangering the life of the congregation.
Wow, that's good. Well, and it's it doesn't stop. There's no clock in, clock out either. The phone can ring. So, you know, when I was deployed in the Army, not so much when I was home, but when you're deployed, in the back of your mind, there's kind of that awareness that anything can happen anytime. The rocket alarm can go off anytime in the middle of the night. Right. So there's always kind of that little spidey senses and just always turned on once you land in Afghanistan. But
right.
in pastoring, it's very similar, where you know that the phone can buzz anytime, and it's, you know, hey, you know, George or John is in the ER or just whatever, and you have to attend to your flock. So it is different. Maybe there's, I don't know, some doctors, on-call doctors, or on, you know, emergency services maybe could come close, but you have eternity kind of in the balance too, and that is heavy.
You do. You're absolutely right. And then there are decisions you make, and I developed this a bit in dissertation, where there are the pastor's greatest battle is discerning what is an emergency and what isn't.
That's true too.
And sometimes, depending on his personality, lots of things would be emergencies. Mm-hmm. And I remember in the early days of my pastoral ministry, where I believed that lots of things were emergencies. And I think my wife just very graciously would laugh in the background, you know, so, you think this is an emergency, you know, but, and now you're able to, as the older you get in pastoral ministry, you get to discern what is an emergency and what isn't. And you get to also discern when is the time to delegate and when is the time that isn't, and which time you shouldn't. And there are things that pastor has to wrestle with as he gets older. He realizes that the control he thought he needed to have to sort of preserve his pastoral gravitas was all a mirage. And that the church thrives when I'm gone for 2 weeks on a vacation, or if I'm gone to speak at a conference. And these are all things that a pastor has to contemplate. And it's always better to contemplate them early on in pastoral ministry than later.
That's really helpful. Very good. Well, I want to switch topics and sort of pivot for a minute. And if there's anything on the pastoral life of the pastor you want to add at the end, I definitely want to give you that opportunity. But as I was reading your bio in preparation for this, as you heard at the beginning, Uri has co-authored a book on Christian pipe smoking. This is available on Kindle. I went and bought it. I think it's $1, and I can't wait to read it. I know it's a small little book. I love pipe smoking. It's really a joy. So talk about it. Why write this little ebook? What was the story behind it? And I think what's the subtitle? Something about offering a incense to the Lord or something. This is great.
I think it was something about a holy incense, an introduction to holy incense, Christian pipe smoking.
Beautiful.
I think it was the title. The part of it actually, this may seem a bit, we're Reformed, so this doesn't sound odd,
right?
But I'm sure our Baptist audience is going to be wondering, what in the world? I actually think that, they probably will. At this point, just skip 10 minutes after.
There you go.
But I think there is a pastoral dimension to pipe smoking. In the book, I developed a sort of a threefold outline that came from a Presbyterian author whose name escapes me right now. But it was a sort of a philosophical distinction he made, and I think it fits well. That cigar smokers are people who desire power, and that's why in movies they're all portrayed by lawyers and mafia men. Right. They're always smoking a cigar. You don't see Al Capone smoking a pipe, and this is the kind of pattern. On the other end, the cigarette smoker is looking for quick fixes. He's the kind of guy who goes from sort of, in some ways, one quick fix to the other. Mm-hmm. So how can I get quick pleasure? How can I find quick release? How can I get a quick high? And those are two extremes. And the pipe smoker sort of finds himself in the middle in a much more contemplative position. He is, and I think this is where the pastoral role should sort of fall if you sort of hierarchize the whole thing. You know, pastors ought to be good pipe smokers, even though I do enjoy my cigars quite a bit these days. Same here. Okay, good. But I think the pipe sort of indicates this sort of Gandalf-like figure. He is a guy who he makes important decisions, but the decisions are not made in a rush like a lawyer has to make a decision in a rush. Decisions are made under extreme contemplation, with wisdom, in dialogue with Bilbo Baggins, in dialogue with others. And it's also a very artistic smoke tool, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, you gotta fill it in, you gotta tap it in. Sometimes you gotta light it 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
If your tobacco's a little too dry, that can cause problems. If your tobacco is cracked, that can cause problems. You got to clean it once in a while. And so there's an art required to it, whereas cigars and cigarettes are easily disposable.
Yeah.
And I think there's a contemplative model there that I think is very helpful for pastors too. If I were to say, I'm not going to be encouraging people to start smoking if they haven't. But if pastors enjoy a good smoke, and I think it can be an incredibly stress-releasing exercise. Pipes are a wonderful thing because it allows us to slow down.
Yes. Yeah.
And it can be really beneficial. Anyway.
Yeah, that's amazing. I've never heard anyone compare pipe smoking to, you know, the benefits to pastoral ministry, but that's incredible. And, you know, you just said it slowed down. I think it's so much easier. I've gotten, you know, for better, for worse, usually it's always for better. I've gotten many people into pipe smoking. And, you know, my brother-in-law is one of them that's coming to mind right now. And it was quick. He was 18, 19. So he was just getting, you know, just able to do this legally. And I was like, dude, get, you know, here. And you gotta, if you're going to do anything, go use a pipe. And he did, but then quickly cigar. And it takes too much time. It's all the packing and the lighting and the on and on. And I'm like, well, he's not wrong. And it is, you know, in a pinch, if it's quick, a cigar is obviously more convenient. But yeah, that having to sit down, slow down, pay attention to what you're doing, it's rewarding. I couldn't explain it better than what you just did right now. That's really awesome.
Well, the other dimension too is the kind of thing you can take to a coffee shop. You know, I smoked a lot of pipes in front of coffee shops. There's a sort of a persona, a kind of view that is attached to a man smoking a cigar, a pipe that's not attached to somebody smoking a cigarette, for example. True. And as I mentioned this in the booklet, I have never had anybody complain about the smell of a pipe.
No, it's amazing.
Never. Yeah. I had constantly people stop me and say that reminds me of Grandpa, you know, that kind of thing. Yeah. And I think you go ahead.
Sorry. I had a neighbor when I was a kid. 'Cause my parents are, you know, they're no drinking, no smoking. But I had a neighbor when I was probably 6, 7, 8 years old. And when Grandpa came for the holidays or whatever, that Grandpa always smoked, and you could smell that cherry tobacco all
cherry around. Tobacco. That appears to be Grandpa's classic. I think every grandpa smokes cherry tobacco.
Yeah, but you're right though. It is good. No one complains. They probably come and ask, you know, oh, what is that? Probably
they do. I've been interrupted many times. When you add the clerical collar, it becomes a whole different level of curiosity.
Nice.
You know?
That's great.
That's
awesome.
A funny thing.
All right. Well, I am so appreciative of your time, Uri. Is there anything on anything that we've talked that you still want to leave us with, or anything else you want to plug as far as projects that you're doing?
Well, thanks, Grant, for the opportunity to talk about a topic that I care very deeply about. I hope the idea is that the Theopolis Institute will be starting a new series called Theopolis Explorations. And these will be a small, digestible books, 100, 120 pages each. In fact, my co-host at the Puritan podcast, Dr. Dustin Messer, has a book coming out for the Theopolis Explorations called I think it's called Multi-Christendoms, I think. Okay. And he's going to be publishing fairly soon. And that is coming out from Theopolis. But my dissertation, which is sort of divided into 3 topics of pastoral friendship, pastoral leisure, and pastoral learning. That will hopefully be published in 3 separate books.
Great.
And so the more information available, I'll make sure I'll alert my friends to it so they can be aware of that. But I really think that we live in an age where pastoral ministry, I don't want to use the term more needed than ever, but it's certainly the kind of ministry that's more sought out than ever. And because of that, we need to be prepared, uniquely, body, soul, academically certain, but be prepared individually to sort of confront these big issues, to be able to speak boldly without crashing when we get home. And this is part of the pastor's dilemma has always been over the years, is that he increases so much in tension because he's dealing with so many big issues that eventually he does burn out. And I'm kind of advocating a fast-paced, but in some ways a digestibly paced pastoral ministry, where the difficulties of pastoral ministry are brought into a bigger picture rather than being isolated. Because the more you isolate issues, the more prone a pastor is to allowing that issue to consume them. And so just be aware of some of these additional resources we put out there. I have lots of great books that I could recommend for pastoral ministry, and I'd be happy to pass those along to you if you like.
Fantastic. Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you so much. I love the conversation. Appreciate it. So everybody, I told you to listen till the end. What we're going to do is we're going to do a giveaway of Uri and Rich Lusk's new commentary on Jonah. So you have to share this episode and tag us. So whether you share it on Facebook or Instagram, Twitter, wherever it is, tag Take Hold Studios, and encourage whoever follows you or is your friend to subscribe to the channel. So I want to be tagged and encourage people to subscribe. That's the criteria. I'll put your name in a hat. It's a digital hat. And then we'll spin the digital wheel and pick a name after about a week and a half or so. But that's the criteria. And you'll get one of Dr. Brito's commentaries, brand new. And
let me throw something in there. How about if I make it 2 books, 2 winners?
Okay. So two winners, or 2 books to the winner?
1 book per winner.
All right. So we got 2 winners now. So I will spin that digital wheel twice.
Sounds great.
And you guys, so we'll get 2 winners. And if you do it multiple times, then it'll just be, you'll get entered again. All right. So that's it. Uri, thank you so much. It was a great conversation. Appreciate it so much.
Grant, the Lord bless your labors, man, and always a joy to talk to you, brother.
Thank you. All right, everybody, go take hold and reorder creation by first reforming your home. This has been the Reformed Reset.
But on the basis of grace and on the finished work of Jesus Christ, the project is back and forth, and the destiny of a new transformed world is assured.
Just put the sourdough in the oven too, so I've got like 40 minutes.